Just walk away. Just walk away. There will be an end to the horror.
And we're live. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Untitled Chats. This is episode episode 91. I have a very special guest today, which is why we have a late start for this show. So I'm glad for anybody that's tuned in to watch it live. My guest, his name is Sam Gerrans. He has a professional background in language, media, strategic communications, and internet technologies. He has made an exhaustive study of Quranic Arabic and conducted a systematic analysis of the Quran and its contents. And on the basis of that analysis, he both believes the Quran to be from God and regards the Islamic religions as later human inventions. He is the author of the Qur'an, a complete revelation, where his consistent Quran-centric hermeneutical methodology is applied to the text of the Quran in its entirety. Now, Sam, how are you doing today? I'm very happy to have you on.
I'm very well, Chris. Thank you very much for inviting me. That was quite an introduction, and probably quite a mouthful. But we will unpack some of that, I hope, as we go through the show. Thanks for inviting me. And it's 8:30 in the morning where I am, so I appreciate you sort of moving your schedule around that.
No problem. I've got a lot of time right now, and I'm happy to do it. Unfortunately, anybody listening, Lamprey won't be with us tonight because where he is, it's now, I think, 1:30 in the morning, so he won't be joining us. So just in case you guys are wondering, that's why he's not here, so it'll just be Sam and I. Now, Sam, I'm having you on the show for a couple reasons. One is because I became familiar with your work maybe a year ago. And it was basically, I stumbled upon your website when I was trying to look for more English translations of the Quran. I have a collection of them, and I just Google searched Quran English translations, and I found your website, downloaded the digital version, which you offer for free, and I will put the link to your website and to your YouTube channel in the show notes so that people can look at your information and your work. And so I downloaded it, and I kind of just shuffled it into a folder and forgot about it. And then a few months later, I was kind of going through my Qurans, and I saw the Quranic complete revelation, and I completely forgotten that I downloaded it. And so I said, what is this? Who is this? And then I went back, looked at your site, found your YouTube channel, and that was all about a year ago. And so for my own personal interests, I wanted to have you on because I converted to Islam in 2005 through marriage, and once I converted, the very interesting part about that was after I had converted, then obviously I had to learn about this religion I had joined called Islam, and my wife refused to teach me. She said it was a man's job. So I dove headfirst into it, and I went really deep, and that might come up later in the talk. So I kind of knew I have Yüksel's version. I know the listeners won't know these names that I'm dropping now, but we will probably mention them later. Khalifa's, what's his name, Shabir from the Quran as Explains Itself. So when I found your work, I thought, yeah, this is a guy that I understand what he's trying to do. From my own experience, it's something I've gone through personally, trying to unpack the Quran and the religion of Islam. And the second reason I wanted to have you on is to introduce your work to perhaps a new audience. I know I've got a few listening now, and to you guys, you might not be that interested in religion itself or Islam, but trust me, this is very compelling stuff, so stick around. And if you are if you do find it interesting and you have questions, go ahead to ask. Be civil, ask any questions, and we'll try to get to them at some point. I do have Warriors in, my moderators in, so he'll keep an eye out for any ne'er-do-wells that appear in the chats. So I think to start, Sam, what I'd like to do is, like I said, I want to introduce you to another audience in your work. So I think where I'll start, we'll try to start from the beginning, and maybe if you can explain, we'll get into your work with the Quran, but maybe if you can start with kind of how you came to become, well, we'll just call it a Muslim right now, and we can get into those definitions of those words, but how did you get into Islam? What was your journey to that?
Thanks, Chris. I'll do my best to know that you did break up a little bit through some of that. So if I disappeared, shoot me a message. I'll backtrack a little bit.
Okay.
I'm English. I'm 52. Brought up in Britain of the 1970s, 1980s, and Britain, as anybody who lives there knows, is in a state of cultural and general decline. It was a great empire, and now it's not, and it's been quite obviously systematically destroyed. And I suppose people have their inclinations, and for me, a normal comprehensive school, and none of what I was being told at comprehensive school really made an awful lot of sense. I'm talking here to do with things like evolution and sociology, and that it's all about nurture, and if you give everybody the same sort of environment, everybody turns out the same. I just knew these things weren't true. We are born with certain skills. I mean, David Beckham was always going to be a great footballer. You can't take it away from the guy. He is what he is. Was interested in why I was alive and what was going to happen to me after I died. People are different. I can remember being like 5 years old and thinking, I used the language of Jesus because I come from a Christian background. So I'm walking along at 5 years old and thinking, where am I going to put my next foot? And I thought, well, does Jesus know I'm going to put my foot there? Or am I going to put it there because Jesus knows? Or does Jesus know because I am going to do it? I mean, these sorts of thoughts are probably not very common for most 5-year-olds. Whereas, most 5-year-olds couldn't play football the way David Beckham could play football. It's just, that's what I was, if you want to use this sort of word, that's what I was good at. It's just what I was born for. It's what I've always enjoyed. So, truth, if you want to call it that. So when I got to, having gone through the comprehensive school and all this, and as I say, I went to a series of pretty rough comprehensive schools, which for somebody like me were a tough experience, because I was a sort of a born philosopher, and I'm surrounded by people who want to kick your head in, well, not necessarily my head, but each other's heads. And education in a British comprehensive school is more about survival than it is about learning anything useful for life. And so I kind of managed to get through that, and I was brought up by what I would call liberals. My family's liberal, which means basically two things. I mean, I've worked out what liberals are. They basically hate Europeans and they hate reality. That's really what it seems to me that liberalism is. It's a fundamental hatred or distrust, at the very least, of these two things: white people and anything that's based in reality of any sort. And so that wasn't much for preparation, because unreality is not a really good way to be prepared, especially at school. You're not getting very much. Mm-hmm. And so when I was like 16, 17, and I'm now in the big wide world, being spectacularly badly prepared for it, reality started to encroach upon me. And I think what happened is I came across death, and it was really the death of my grandfather. In some ways made me think, very closely about things. And then I began to read the Bible and so on. And I started from a Christianesque point of view. So, I mean, I can talk about that in a little bit more detail if you want. But if you would like me to jump straight to the Islam thing, I'm quite happy to do that.
Well, I find that interesting too, especially what you said about being 5 years old. One of the arguments I've made, and I've actually mentioned it on my channel before, is that I always believed that a belief in God or the Creator is very instinctual, I think, belief in it as for a child. I think a lot of people would argue that, well, it's a child, of course you believe in God. But I just found it fascinating that a child without the oh, did I lose Sam?
Okay, I can hear you now.
Okay, sorry, I must have cut out.
Yeah.
Okay, I was just going to say I've said before that I think it's instinctual for a child to actually believe in God, despite that a child can't understand religion, obviously, yeah. But a child does understand the concept of God, and I think it's quite instinctual. Now, you'd said you'd come from a Christian background.
Yeah, I can speak to that for cover that in about 3 or 4 minutes, I hope.
Okay. Go ahead.
Well, I'm an all-in kind of guy, and I read the Bible. I read it very attentively. I started with the book of Ecclesiastes, which is about halfway through what we call the Old Testament, and it closes with the words, "Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep His commandments, for this is the whole duty of man." And coming from basically a degenerate background where it wasn't very clear what your duties were, and it's all about your feelings and so on, this made things very clear for me, because I knew that I was going to die one day, and all I had to do was find out what God wanted and do it, and that seemed to be the whole duty of man. So how to do that? And my first mistake, I made a few mistakes. My first mistake was I assumed that the Bible was a book, and it isn't. It's a library. It's a selection of books put together.
I call it a broken clock.
That's a good way of putting it. It's a good way of putting it. And I'm a reader, and I read this book from beginning to end, and quite honestly, I found it quite confusing. God seems to change his mind quite a lot of the time, but I then came across Christians, and Christians seemed very sure about what God was all about, and I didn't find them particularly convincing, I'll be honest with you, for quite a long time. And but at some point I thought, okay, well, clearly God is real. Clearly we've got these various contradictory versions about Jesus, and that's, if you read that's where it's all going. You go to the end of the Old Testament, which is Malachi in our edition. It's not in the Hebrew scriptures, but Malachi, and then straight into Matthew. Then you go through Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, feeds you straight into Acts, through Acts into the epistles of Paul and Revelations, and you're out. And it just seems to be all going toward one sort of final outcome. And it's true. Jesus does say in the Gospels, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh unto the Father but by me, etc., etc., etc. These words definitely are there. And the problem is I'm quite an attentive reader, and in Mark he's saying all kinds of different things. It's really Paul who created this religion, but at this point I'm 16, 17, I didn't have this level of sophistication. I didn't really realize. So long story short, I thought, okay, well, this it seems pretty confusing. It seems fairly sort of anti-intuitive. Why is it that? How come Jesus comes at this point? But what about Moses? He didn't know about Jesus. So what? Is he going to hell? I went into anyway. I just decided, okay, I'm going to close my eyes to these things that don't make sense, and I'm going to. If serving God is the whole duty of man, and clearly this society that I'm in, it doesn't matter how many packets of crisps you eat, it doesn't matter how much money you've got, you're still going to die. There's no way out of this. I don't care who you are. This is just the logical reality of it all. I thought, okay, well, all right, let's serve the Lord then. How do I do it? And Christians had answers to this, you see. They said, well, the way you do it is this. And so I thought, well, it doesn't really fully make sense to me, but okay. And I did for a couple of years, 18 months. I lived in or on the outskirts of this sort of Christian community, and went out and proselytized, etc. But to be honest with you, it became, what's true is that Christians have feelings. I had those feelings too. People have feelings when they're doing things that they feel are worthwhile, when you feel that you're doing something that's helping people, when you feel like, that God doesn't hate you. These, of course, there are some associated feelings with this, but the Christians are there with a whole grammar that they're going to apply to these feelings. It's the Holy Ghost. It's not just, they've got this. The problem with the Holy Ghost, though, is it comes and goes. It's not a reliable partner in the affair, in your endeavor, because the Holy Ghost, who's got the Holy Ghost and who's just in a good mood. It all gets very vague, and then it gets into the realms of almost, in my opinion, almost spiritual possession in a lot of cases. The problem with it all is that this brain that we've been given didn't seem to have any place in it all, you see, Chris. So I got to a point where I just thought, I can't in all conscience spend my life trying to convince other people to do something that I'm not entirely sure of myself, so I'm going to stop. And that's where I got to with it. Even though, and I lost all of my friends, I lost, I felt I'd made something of a fool of myself. I mean, I was 17 or 18, maybe 19 at this point. But it would be better for me to, be a man alone without friends, without any sort of community, than to pay the price of hypocrisy to stay in a community. And I made a very fundamental decision at that point. I decided that I was never going to accept anything that doesn't make sense to me personally. I don't care how much authority somebody's got. I don't care how learned they are. They're not going to die for me. They're not going to stand in my place when I die. They're not going to give account for me. I have to give account for me. And I think at that time, I was about 19, I basically had it with religion in total. And, these organized mechanisms of what I call crowd control. Now, it doesn't mean that I don't believe in God. I just don't believe in any of this stuff. So, long story short, I went away and read a load of more books for 6 months, and then I went to university where I studied, as it happens, Russian language and literature. And when I was at university, I just decided that I'm not going to read any more scriptures of any kind while I'm here. And I just thought about things for myself. And that was a very useful time for me. So, but that was the lead up into when I got to about 28, 29, when, all the way through this time, I'm reading voraciously. I'm reading all kinds of different stuff. And I'm thinking for myself, still reading occasionally the New Testament and so on, but not from the point of view of organized religion. So that, I think, brings us up to, at this point, I'm now 28, 29. I'm living in Russia, where I happen to live now. And I decided, I can't remember. I can remember why. I remember that I had remembered when I was a younger man that I would read the Qur'an. And the reason why I read it was because I remember when I was about 18 or 19, the radio announced that we had just attempted to murder Gaddafi in his bed. This was under Thatcher, when Thatcher and Reagan sent fighter jets, bomber jets over to go and kill Gaddafi. Mm-hmm. And the argument was, well, because he's a terrorist. And I remember thinking, well, it's quite rich for us to be calling anybody terrorists. So I remember all I knew about him was that he was an Arab and the Arabs were Muslims. So I remember making a mental note. One day I'm going to read the Qur'an, and that day came when I was, and also I was given a copy. I was given a copy when I was about 25 in an Islamic bookshop, but I didn't read it. I just stuck it in the cupboard somewhere. In
Russia? When you were in Russia?
No, I was back in the UK on a business trip. I went to and fro quite often, and I just happened to be walking down, I think it was Kentish Town or somewhere in London, and I go into shops. especially going to bookshops a lot, and I met this guy. Quite honestly, I found the Muslims very unimpressive intellectually, but what they didn't do was try to finesse me in the way that Christians do. They didn't sort of, they weren't trying to work me. They weren't trying to smile me into their cult.
Right.
They looked like, frankly, I couldn't care if I was there or not. And their sort of facial expressions were very limited range, and their social skills were pretty much very pixelated. But I quite like that, because I thought, well, at least they're not trying to sort of finesse me. This guy just said, basically, you're interested in God, are you going to read this book if I give it to you? Okay, here you are then. I said, well, okay, thanks. See you later. That was the conversation. But later, when I got to about 29, I'd left this book at my sister's, and I just thought, I'm going to read that, and that's really where, if you want to call it Islam, but I've got quite a lot of qualifications I want to put onto this when we get to it. But that's when I started to read this book called the Qur'an when I was about 29.
Okay, and that was so. Your experience of kind of understanding what Islam is was by the introduction to the Qur'an first.
Yes.
And did you ever go through like a formal kind of conversion to the religion of it?
No, I don't believe that. Now I can kind of give you my proper presentation, because firstly,
Yes.
certainly I read the Qur'an. I read it very carefully, and then I read it again very carefully. And I remember as I read it, I was reading the Abdul Yusuf Ali translation, which is the guy's. He was I think a Bangladeshi who grew up in Bangladesh and then moved to the United Kingdom and then later died in the United Kingdom. He was a very refined man. I think quite a refined soul, but he wasn't, I think, a deep thinker. And he obviously had quite a good command of the English language. And what he tried to do was write a King James Bible type of Quranic sort of edition.
And he, for the listeners, he mentioned the Abdul Ali version. There are around 5 official English translations out there. I'm just kind of, I want to get the listeners up.
Well, I mean, official. Who's to say what's official?
Exactly, that's my whole point.
Well, I mean, this is a part of my. You're goading me into the direction of my the rest of my presentation. Don't worry. I can't wait to get there myself. But I mean, there are editions that the Church of Islam, the official Church of Islam, if you want to call it that, will say are good. But I mean, as I read this, there are parts of the Qur'an which you cannot misunderstand. I mean, to give you, there's some technical terminology for it, but I don't think that's necessary right now.
Yeah.
For example, there are things which are very clear in the Qur'an, and if you think of something that's clear, if you see a door with closed written on it, a shop door with closed on it, there's no way of misinterpreting that. That's a very clear thing. And then there are some things in the Qur'an which are not so clear, and the Qur'an itself says that people who are inclined to lies, they will take the not so clear things and they'll ignore the clear things.
Yeah, they'll reverse it.
Yeah, they'll reverse it. Now there are very clear things in the Qur'an that even what I call brand Islam, and this is this religion, and I call it a brand. It is a brand. It's been created. We can get into some of that in a little while, but even it is not able to falsify or to corrupt in any way these very clear statements in the Qur'an. And these very clear statements are things to do, for example, with what the nature of God is. Mm-hmm. See, coming from a Christian background, it's not clear. The Christians will tell you it is, but it isn't, and they know that it isn't. Why? Because it's extremely contradictory. And they'll tell you on the one hand, you pray and ask Jesus into your heart, you're saved by grace, but, saved by grace, not of works, lest any man should boast. And then, you read somewhere else, well, you show me, I'll show you my faith by my works. So the truth is, it's very contradictory. Is it faith? Is it works? Is it both? Who knows? It's this, it's not. Once saved, never saved. And the Christians are going round and round and round and round. In fact, the Qur'an says they will go round and round and round and round until the end of time, until the end of the world. And they're still going round now. After reading the Qur'an, I realized it says very simply, say God is one. Qul huwallahu ahad. God is one. He's just one. That's it. That's the answer. One. In fact, the Jews knew this before, because to be fair to them, the Hebrew scriptures say this. They say that Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one God. This is true, just one. Now Christians, obviously, they've got their 3-in-1. They're sort of it's almost like an oil advertisement. They're 3-in-1. God, but it's very simple. God is one. But there are other very simple statements that made a lot of sense to me when I was reading it. Some things to do with marriage, to do with inheritance law, to do with how to get divorced. Very practical, very fair. And these things don't admit of more than one interpretation. You can't even Brand Islam can't misinterpret these. Now, having said all that, as I was reading the translation, you get to these bits and you just go, you can just feel it be going along, it's making sense, and then go, and all the bits where I was getting this feeling were to do with the religion. It's not just that I didn't personally like it, it's just it didn't seem to fit. It didn't fit. You know, you see, a hand and a glove bear a correspondence that a hand or a foot and the same glove are never going to get. You can push and you can shove, but eventually, maybe you can make that glove go on your foot, but it's not where it's meant to be, and it will always sit wrong. And as I was reading this, you see, I realized there were all these bits, and all these bits are to do with the religion, and all of these interpolations. Interpolations just means words chucked in that aren't actually in the text.
Right.
Which are there when you read these translations, and what they've done is what I saw in Christianity. They've got a text, and then they've created a religion, and now what they've done is they've trying to attach this religion to this text, and the way it's done, because then I had to go, because I didn't start off like this. You see, I had no background in what people call Islam. I call it Brand Islam. I had no background in it. I left UK when I was about 27 or something, 28, actually 27, 28. Muslims, when I left the UK, this is before ISIS became a thing, before the Twin Towers, before the West went looking for a new enemy that it had previously created. So when I left the UK, Muslims were corner shop owners where nothing had prices on it, and they just look at you and make up a price. Or, if they were better educated, they were doctors or worked in IT. They were generally pretty quiet people whose houses smelt quite funny. That's it. That's basically it. Okay, they weren't this big problem. It wasn't like, everybody looks at you as though you're a potential terrorist. None of that existed. I mean, this is hard for people who are young to understand, but the indoctrination you're going through right now, it hasn't always been there. This is all new. This is just a new lot of downloads. So when I left the UK, we didn't have any of that. It was about to start. So I was out of the country when, Muslims, in inverted commas, were being turned into the new bogeyman, and they had to be turned into the new bogeyman. The reason is because the old bogeyman, which we'd also created, certainly sustained, which is the Soviet Union, had been allowed to collapse, you see. So we've got rid of that enemy, in inverted commas, but it never was an enemy. They were always the same people at the top of both systems. And I've no reason to believe it's any different today with Brand Islam. But I didn't have a background in that. So I came back for another business trip, and I'd read this book twice, and I thought, I'm not going to get tricked again. I'm going to be careful. So I went straight back to the same Islamic bookshop with a load of money, and I said, what do I need to read? It wasn't that I started off by saying, I'm now going to, because when I read this book, I thought anybody who followed this would be at the top of the world.
Right.
If you really followed this book, and it says, and the believers, they will be the successful. There it is. This is in the early verses of what's called Al-Baqarah, just the second chapter of the books. So I thought, whoever really follows this, they must be amazing. So I went back to the UK, and I met some of these amazing people. Frankly, very underwhelming, not less curious people you could hardly wish to meet. But I said, load me up with the books. What do I need? I brought a rucksack. I got some money. I was on a business trip. I went straight from the airport to this place, and I bought a £200 worth of books, which isn't perhaps so much today, but 20-something years ago, it was more like £400 or £500 worth of books. And they just gave me all these books, what I ought to read. So I got through whatever is I had to do. I went back home to Russia, and I read them all. And this was about the religion, you see, as intoned by Sunni Islam.
Right.
And I read it. I thought, this is nonsense. I mean, this is not even very good nonsense. It's your listenership may not appreciate the difference. You see, what's happened in the West is we had something called the Enlightenment, and we also had something called the Reformation. The Reformation was basically when people said, we're not playing anymore to the Catholic Church. We are going to think for ourselves now. Islam, whatever we mean by that, has never been through that process. And so it's never really been challenged, because Islam lived within, and now I'm talking about Islam as a civilization. I'm not talking about Muhammad who owns a corner shop who lives down the street from you. I'm talking about Islam as a civilization, okay? As whether it was Arab, whether it was Persian, whether it was Turkish, whatever. But as a civilization, it had two basic areas. It had the inner area, which is where all the quote-unquote Muslims lived, and that was, the House of Peace. And then it had the House of War, which is the edge where they were having fights with other people, or either trying to defend their boundaries or trying to expand those boundaries. But they never really had to do an awful lot of thinking and arguing inside those boundaries. And if you've tried to get into any kind of religious conversation with Muslims in the last 50 years or so, it shows. But what's happened is they've been exported en masse to the West. We can get into why that's happened, if you want. But what's happened to them is that for the first time ever, they're actually being challenged, by Christians who can think, and in fact have been thinking for a long time. I mean, one can agree with what Christians say or disagree with it, but they do think to some extent, at least. And Muslims don't and won't, and actually regard anybody who does as an enemy of some kind. Well, I'd been through, a certain brand of Christianity, and I didn't care at this point. So I thought, I'm going to get to the bottom of this, because the Qur'an had enough in it that made a lot of sense for me to think I'm going to apply myself to really understanding this book. And just, a last part of this, just so people know, they may not have a background. The way that this religion works is that you've got this book called the Qur'an, but that's not where the religion comes from. The religion comes from a whole different literature called the Hadith, or aḥādīth, give it its plural form in Arabic. Yes. It's supposedly a library of the things that Muhammad supposedly said and did. And I say supposedly because what we know Muhammad said and did is in the Qur'an. What this other stuff, it was written down around 200 years later.
Yeah, it's all conjecture.
It's hearsay at the very least, and it's by definition it's hearsay. It's like your grandfather heard from his grandfather, heard from somebody about the Napoleonic War, okay? And in terms of time, it's about the same. So that whole literature is what actually this religion is created on. That's what it stands and falls on. And the Qur'an is not the foundation for this religion. It's not even the wallpaper. It's just some little book somewhere that occasionally they refer to and they make a big deal of, but they don't really look to for guidance.
Exactly. And I want to interject in this here for a second. I really want my listeners to understand where we're headed here in this conversation. And I know that I've brought this up. When I first heard you use the word brand Islam, I went, okay, that's exactly what it is. I was calling it Mohammedism or Islamism. Mm-hmm. And then I heard you say brand Islam. I'm like, yes, that's exactly what it is. And I want the listeners to understand this. I mean, we're going to get into what Sam means by brand Islam, and I know some of you that are listening now have heard me use that word, because what we're about to talk about is not only how Sam came to do his own translation of the Quran and the reasons for it, but also the fact that the religion that you or anybody in the world calls Islam is not based on this book of the Quran.
No, of course not.
It doesn't exist. It's not there at all. And Sam, I knew about this years and years ago, and the more that I looked into it, the more this religion of Islam just fell apart. And you read the Quran. I've read the Quran many times, and as you read it, you just like this has no representation in this brand Islam and if for those of you who think you're confused about how to identify what brand Islam is, simple, turn on the TV, brand Islam.
Yeah, it's right. I have a background, I've actually several, but one of them was for a couple of years I happened to work at actually quite a high level in international public relations, so I do know what a brand looks like. And when I saw this, I thought this is a brand. Now, what am I really doing? What I'm saying is that it's, you see, most Muslims, quote unquote, will say, well, yes, Islam is from the Quran and the Hadith, but what they don't understand is that these two sources are antithetical. You can have one, or well, I mean, the Hadith contradict themselves as well, but you could kind of have one, or you could have the other, but you can't have both. They are like oil and water. And the problem with it is, and this is one of the reasons why I think that brand Islam and democracy have got an awful lot in common, is that you have to be able to hold two mutually exclusive ideas in your head at the same time without seeing a contradiction. That's what they both have. That they're both basically anti-reality, and once I think it was it will come to me in a moment. Who can convince you to believe insanities can get you to perform atrocities. It'll come back to me in a moment. But that's what's happening, and that's what's happening within this religion. You can read the Qur'an and it says this and it says this and it says this, and then you read the Hadith and it's saying something completely different, and yet you've got to marry these two things together. What happens is you become very fractured. And you can't help it. And what happens with, and I'm not saying this to be critical, but it is purely an observation. What happens with people who are from a Muslim background is, especially in the West, is they either dump it after second generation because they realize it's foolishness, and they have a very high tension with their parents, or they basically pay what I call a time tax, where I'm going to jump up and down 5 times a day. I'm going to do these various other things, and just leave me alone the rest of the time.
Right.
So they're paying this minimum tax on their life in order to keep this God off their back, and that doesn't seem to me like a very worthwhile way of living your life. But what I did, the reason why I can say with utter confidence that these two things are completely contradictory, is that my background was a linguistic background. Words have got meanings, they just have. And if you want to know what words mean, you look how they're used. And I mean, this may be a little bit deeper than some of your listeners want to go, but I came across a guy called Bedr Khrosni, and Bedr Khrosni, in a nutshell, worked out that his job was to work out what a language which had been discovered, all these libraries, the Hittite libraries had been discovered that were written in cuneiform. They were written in an alphabet that we knew, but we didn't know the language. And he just put all of these words into he tabulated the whole lot and worked out what the most often occurring word was in all of these words in this library. And he reasoned that because this was an agrarian society, this word must mean bread. And starting from this point, he managed to piece together this whole language. You see, words have got meanings, and those meanings are consistent. And the Qur'an itself, it says that it is consistent. And it's, so I realized as I was reading, there were these words that the traditionalist Muslim, what I call brand Islam, he says, this word means this. And if you just look at that one little place, well, perhaps it does. But if you look at all the places, because what I did was I put this whole thing into an Excel spreadsheet, right. And then I could very quickly compare all of those words. And I saw, well, it seems to mean that in maybe here, but what about over there? I'm going back to my hand and foot and the glove analogy.
This is what you call the pantextual approach.
Pantextual analysis, absolutely. Yes. So you go through every single, and maybe your audience not very well acquainted with the subtleties of languages, or maybe Arabic. Arabic is a very interesting language in the sense that it all works on roots. Yeah. And it is quite easy once you understand how those roots work to work out what's going on. We have to give you an example in English. For example, because we're all English speakers, we feel that there's a connection between the word hospital and hospitality and hospitable. We just feel that because there's a common root. But if I invented another word, hospitate, and said to you that it meant give me 10% of your income, right? You'd have a few questions, wouldn't you?
Yes.
Well, this is what brand Islam does. This is a crude example, but just to kind of get across to your audience, these are the kind of tools. We've actually got a toolkit. I developed a toolkit of coming to this text and working with it as a complete revelation. Because I mean, if it is what it claims to be, which is from God and protected and a guidance for all mankind, then I'm interested. If it's not, if it's just nonsense, then I'm going to the pub. Okay, that's just me.
Right.
I don't have any pre-existing. I didn't come to a religion called Islam and think, got to grow a long beard and walk around huffing and puffing and saying, women got to put more clothes on, and all of that. No. I didn't sit and have long conversations with Arabs with long beards and think, "Wow, that's really impressive. I'm going to do that." No, I didn't. I've actually never had that experience. When I read this book, I read it on its own terms. I was very impressed. I was looking, I wanted to know, how could it be God would leave us without guidance? How could that be? Now, people you can like the Qur'an, you can dislike the Qur'an, but textually, leaving aside what, some Christians will say, textually, the Qur'an, it is, it has its integrity. You can say, if you don't like it, okay, fine. But this isn't like the Christian Bible. It's not even like the Hebrew Scriptures. It is something that goes back. It is, what we've got now. There are some subtleties to do with diacritic marks and voweling and so on. But the actual ḥurūf text, the original written text, is what we had originally. And all I wanted to do was to analyze it as a European, on the basis of an engaged intellect that wants real answers, not assuming some religion. And what I found was, after all of this time, is that this book does stand up. Mm-hmm. But what doesn't stand up is the religion. The religion and this book are they're absolutely incompatible.
Absolutely. And just commenting on what you said, how you didn't sit down and have long conversations with guys with long beards. I actually did that. And when I was in Indonesia, because that's where I converted, right?
Were you impressed?
No, and that's one of the reasons. That's one of the reasons why I went deep into exploring the Qur'an. And I think I was lucky too, because a lot of Indonesia borrows a lot of words from Arabic, because they were a lot. I mean, it's the most populous Muslim country in the world. So the Muslims, but the Muslims did a big long migration through Southeast Asia, and they kind of stopped in Java. So now when you go there, it's the dominating religion. And because of that, there's a lot. They borrow a lot of Islamic words, and I think the final straw for me was because the Indonesian word for religion is agama, and so and I just as a side note, and how you're saying words have meaning. Going through the Quran, I think the final straw for me was, well, it never uses that word to describe Islam. Mm-hmm. It just says deen. Mm-hmm. It's so I get what you're saying. I understand, like, the words have meaning, and the words that are in the Quran, as you said, and when you take a certain word and you use the pantextual approach and you apply it wherever it's used, and you kind of come to understand what it means by this book, and it's not a religion. Again, I gotta say that, and I can't say that enough times. But anyway, that's right. Go ahead.
It is really simple.
Yeah.
The Quran says those who believe in God and the last day. So someone who believes in the existence of God and his supremacy, and the last day, i.e., the day of judgment, and does good works, they have their reward.
Yeah. Very simple.
Now there are, it then lists various sects. It says it doesn't matter whether you're a Christian or this or a Sabine. It doesn't. This is very simple. God is one. If you believe in Him, and the last day, and you do good works, you have your reward. I can't see what's complicated about that. The only thing that could possibly complicate that is a religion.
Yes.
And one of the, I suppose, defining characteristics of men is that they take the specifics of their dogmas and impose them over the simplicity of their revelations. And I think it takes, every generation or so, it takes somebody to come along and say, this is all nonsense. And normally what happens, of course, is they kill those people.
Yes.
And then a little bit later they realize they were right. So I think perhaps we're going through something a little bit like that. But I'm not here to change Islam. I don't really care about it. For me, I'm interested in this book. And my life would have been so much simpler and actually safer had I found this book in a box in a cave somewhere, in the Qumran cave. Here I found this, and now I can just translate this book and tell everyone what it means, and they could, they could like it or not like it. But because there's a whole cultural history and attached to this, and a lot of vested interests, I mean,
yes.
Saudi Arabia, attached to this, because this is a mind control mechanism, and just like democracy, just like feminism, just like freedom, it's got a whole emotional payload attached to it, and it's how you can manipulate huge amounts of people. I have a bit of a background, so I recognize some of the common traits here, but I want to know the truth. And if the truth be that this book is false, then I want to know that. And the Qur'an itself says, if you bring something better than this book, I will follow it. And that remains my position. It's not that I have this, people say, when did you become a Muslim?
Yeah.
I don't think you can become a Muslim any more than you can become a pregnant. It's just a ridiculous combination of words, which is only possible because it falls through the cracks between English and Arabic, because Arabic doesn't have an indefinite article. Right. So one is not a Muslim. It doesn't work like that. Either you submit to God or you don't. Yes. And what you call yourself, this one, that's an add-on, that's a bolt-on. God is not deceived. Who we trying to fool here? So that's the background to it. And one of the go ahead. Sorry,
I was just going to say too. You mentioned how you're not interested in changing Islam. Well, you know what happened.
Not at all.
You know what happened to the last guy that tried to do that. I'm talking about Khalifa.
Yeah, well, I mean, this may be a little bit of a specialized subject for your audience, but just in summary, there was a chap called Rashid Khalifa who was an Egyptian, I think, chemist or biologist who because he had a brain, had to emigrate to America. And he did some analysis on the Qur'an, which I actually don't accept and don't find particularly interesting, but a lot of people do and find interesting and do accept. And to do with mathematical things to do with the Qur'an, he made the big mistake of saying that he thought he was a messenger, which is not a good idea, because in his case it got him killed. For the record, that isn't my claim. What I do claim is that I can read a book with my brain engaged, and if that be enough to get me killed, well, I'll just have to accept that that's the world I live in. But yeah, that's what happened to him. That's true.
A lot of people don't realize he was on the same fatwa list as Rushdie. Did you know that?
Right. Well, I didn't.
Exact same time that it was put up.
My position is, God gives us a time to be born, and time to die. He's above all things. I don't worry about stuff like that. I do my job, I do my work, and I've met a lot of people in this life who try to. They run away from death, but it will come and find you no matter where you are, and it'll come find the mullahs and the muftis and the people pushing the homosexual agenda and all the rest of it. Find us all. There's no escaping. Doesn't matter where you go. So I don't worry about any of that myself personally. It's not courage exactly. It's just I don't know why, but I just don't think about it. I just concentrate on serving God. That's the way.
You're kind of like an untapped gem to me. On the internet, because again, like a lot of my listeners might not be interested in pursuing kind of this sort of information or knowledge. I know for a fact that a lot of people that listen to my stream call themselves atheists.
Well, atheists are half right. I mean, the thing about if you're genuinely an atheist, you are actually half right in a way, because there is no God but God. And so they've got halfway through that statement, and they've managed to do it sincerely. I say hold on to your sincerity and see where it leads.
Right. There is no God but God. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, that is that's Al-Fatiha.
Yeah. Well, it's not Al-Fatiha, but it's it is a statement which we come across many times in the Quran, and the thing is that people conflate that with a religion that they've seen, and but if you were looking, I would suggest we're living in a world of evidence. Just look around you and consider consider the evidence for yourself. And a good way to start is to go to, in my opinion, a good way to start is to go to a cemetery, a graveyard, and just hang out for a bit. And, you know, don't take a mobile telephone, don't take anything of a distracting nature, and make yourself spend 2 or 3 hours there and see how you feel when you leave.
Well, that's a good idea. Yeah, it's. I think for a lot of people, it's this. I've always said that God doesn't need a religion, but religion needs a God. And so,
very good.
And I think what happens is that religion gets conflated with God.
Yep.
And so a lot of people's kind of sour taste of the concept of God or a creator is done by God being presented to the world for the most part, because for a lot of people, that's as they grow up in this world, and this isn't the greatest, you know, it's not easy growing up in this world.
No, I know.
But you know, growing up in this world, you're kind of presented with this sort of front, which is saying, they say we have the copyright on God. If you want to understand God, you got to come through us, and that's sort of this religion, and every religion is guilty of that, including the brand Islam, and including all the Christian faiths, etc.
Sure, and I'd just like to say, I'm not saying that all people from any particular religion, including brand Islam, are all bad. I don't think that.
Yes.
I'm just saying what I do think, though, is that they they won't think, and they won't let me think either, and that's not acceptable. That's the point at which I part ways with them. If they don't want to do their own thinking, that's their affair. But they're not going to stop me from doing mine. That's all I'm saying. And you know, I agree with what you just said. There are a lot of forces out there, but I do know that if a man turns to God in sincerity and repents, that's usually the first step. He'll find that God is is accepting of repentance. That's been my experience. I don't claim to have been anything great. I'm still not anything great. I'm just a man, you know, with good and bad. But I have repented of my sins, and I seek God, and I do the best that I can, and God has been very gracious to me, and I feel extremely grateful. And I don't think it's because there's any specialness to do with me. I just was ready to go, and that's what I've done. And as it says in the Gospels, you know, lift up your eyes and behold the fields, for they are white or ready for harvest. You know, the workers are few. That's what I'm trying to say. There are very few people who choose. There's a lot of room where I am. And in the work that I do, I get all kinds of approaches, all kinds of people sending me, mainly, I mean, my inbox. I've actually streamed it to deal with the reality of what I get, because people write to me with the same sort of stuff over and over again. Most people they're looking for a site to bank on. They want a guy to be their sort of little hero in the religion stakes. It doesn't work like that. I can't do anything for anybody else. I'm just doing my own stuff. But I've actually now got folders in my inbox, and I can just quickly read through them. Actual doers. All right, so that's one folder. That's for people who actually do something. Right. You can imagine how many people are, how many emails go into that one. Completed purchases, that's just to do with book buys. Hate mail, help me projects. Help me projects are when people write to me. Basically, they want to do something, they want to start something, but they haven't really got the courage to do it, and they want me to have the courage and to do it for them. So they go in that one. Mad people, safely ignore, and useless advice. That's what that's what I get, and that's what, unfortunately, what happens. What I'm much more interested in are people who take the fact of their own inevitable death seriously, right, and repent to God and seek Him. It's not about me, for sure. I'm just I don't have any monopoly on anything except using my own brain and whatever skills I've been given, and whatever guidance God allows me. That's it. That's it. People write to me all the time, and especially, your audience may not appreciate this, but people who are from an Islamic background, which I'm not, and thank God I'm not, they're so incapable of thinking. They're used to asking mullahs what they should do at every point, and people write and ask me, and I just say things like, if I reply, which isn't very often now, things like, think for yourself. Like a week later, I'll get a reply, whoa, thank you for that amazing I say things like, why don't you read the Qur'an, go for a long walk, have a think about it, and make a rational decision on the basis of that lot.
Yes, yeah. That's a really, and again, that's, like I said, I found it fascinating how you kind of you came to this, because you just the book, the Quran, kind of approached you first, and then that set off your journey.
Well, to be honest, I have to. I mean, I'm grateful for the guidance and the blessings of God. I'm also very grateful for the fact that I have an excellent wife. I couldn't do what I do without her. It's just how it is. We went through great hardships, actually. I won't go into the details of it, but just life, bashing you around. At the time I was doing this work, and this work, I mean, it's 536,000 words in its current edition.
Yes, it's big, man.
It's big, but it's not. It's actually the work that was behind that. That's the actual work. I mean, writing it was the easy part. It's just but it was a good 3, 4, 5 years solid, 18-hour a day every day, and all of that. And my wife supported that, and she, because when she and I met, I had a great job and my own business and this, that, and the other. And I said, hey, darling, I've got a really good idea. What I'd like to do is to make myself permanently unemployable and to antagonize 1.6 billion Muslims and potentially get us all killed. How's that?
No, you're absolutely right, man. If you, to do that work, you're going to have some kind of compliance by if you're married to your wife. Otherwise, it would be impossible. So
not just some kind of compliance. You need total dedication.
Totally, absolutely.
I mean, absolutely. My wife said, well, if they kill us, I hope they kill us all together.
Right.
And that's total dedication.
Yeah, no kidding. And then you said it took 5 years to complete.
Yeah, I mean, it's always, it's still to some extent a work in progress. Yeah. I mean, obviously I have an edition out there, and what I've done, you see, my metric. I mean, you said you touched on this earlier about that I was sort of an untouched gem on the internet.
Yes.
I've actually, my launch strategy has been to try. I know it sounds a bit counterintuitive, but I've got no interest in large amounts of people, and this isn't how it works nowadays. It's everybody wants. They think more followers are the better. If Quranically this isn't true, Quranically you're much better off with a few really good men.
One of the best quotes from the Quran is, if you follow the majority, you will be led astray.
You'll be wrong. And if you look at my book, it's dedicated to the few. I'm not interested in the majority. The majority are, actually useless, and in fact a liability. What I'm looking for is a few good men, and I've found 3, and that's my metric. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I'm not talking about people who support. Some people support my work financially, and that's great, and they're good in a different way. That is great. But I'm talking about doers, real doers. And I've got almost like this hardcore now of currently there's 4 of us, of people that I call brothers and genuinely trust, and we're who have become, they're now involved in this project. It's not, I'm not setting up a cult of the personality or anything like that. I don't really care who finishes this, Chris. I just want it done. Mm-hmm. That's the way I see it. This work should be done. And where we are with it now is, there are, it's a big work, 536,000 words and all the rest of it, but we're taking it to the next step in terms of the editing and etc. And what I would really like, my kind of pet dream is, it irritates me that the Christians have got the corner on the really good books, and they make the wonderful Bibles. I have some myself. There's a publishing company called the Local Church Publishing Company or something like that. I have one of their Bibles. It's a wonderful book, just as a thing, leather covers, beautiful pages and everything.
Put on a coffee table.
Well, you can preferably take it with you, or wherever you go, and use it and read it. It's a fantastic thing. And I would love for for Quran believing, for Quranites, if you want to call it that, to have a book that's of a similar quality, and that's really where I'd like to get to at some point. But to be honest, I mean, my main focus, especially at the moment, is to do with the God protocol and so on, which I'm quite happy to touch on if you'd like.
Yes, actually, that's exactly where I wanted to go. We've gone about an hour, so let's get into that, and then maybe reserve 5-10 minutes at the end. There's a couple questions that I think are relevant and that are directed at you. We could go over in the chats, but let me just kind of preface it. Sam's current work now is called the God Protocol, and well, I know about it because of the videos that you've been posting, sort of as I guess you're sort of going through the different chapters when you're doing the videos?
Yeah, I mean, what I'm doing is I'm writing a chapter at a time, and I don't know if anybody else has ever done this, but I'm actually recording the first drafts and uploading them. And one of the reasons is that if anything happens to me, at least this is out there. Again, it goes back to, it's not about me. Somebody's going to do this work, whether it's me or whoever it is. It's not of a primary interest to me. What is of interest to me is that it gets done. So I'm putting it out there, even though in the final book, it's going to be a bit different because editing changes things. But these aren't just thrown together drafts. These are quite well thought through drafts, but they're still drafts.
Now, the God Protocol, I'll get you kind of to define that for people. I understand based on how you've explained it, and having read the Quran myself, I understand it. But explain to the listeners exactly what the God Protocol is. Okay.
What Brand Islam briefly says that the Quran is about a religion. It's about creating a religion called Islam, where you pretty much check your brain out for the rest of your life and just jump up and down 5 times a day and do 5 or 6 very certain things, and you'll go to heaven. That's it. Okay, so basically you've got to negate whatever talents and abilities and that you've been given, etc. And this is the religion that it wants you to follow. I as anyone who's listened to this point realizes I'm not about that, and I'm not just not about it because I don't agree with it, and I don't, but because it isn't in the Quran anywhere. So what is the Quran actually talking about? Well, what's interesting in it is it's talking about a series of messengers, starting with Noah being the first one, who he was asked by God, told by God to warn his people, you see. And then the next messenger, Hud, and then there was Salih, and then there were various other messengers. And Muhammad saw himself, if you just read this book, right? I mean, if you read this book, the Quran, as a complete revelation, I mean, there's an original thought, and didn't assume all of Brand Islam's, extraneously derived stuff, what would you see this as? You'd see as a handbook on doing exactly what all these other people had done. This is what Muhammad was doing. He was warning his people. Now, what's the mechanism? The mechanism is that people create very evil societies, and anyone who's been around for more than 5 minutes, looking around, will realize that the world is a pretty evil place. And sure, I would agree that pretty much, in sort of ups and downs here and there, dips and troughs, etc., and peaks and troughs. But I think that what we see now, where we are now in the last 50 years, is quite phenomenally evil. And I'll just name a few of those things. Sure. For example, one would be the wholesale slaughter of unborn children and abortions. I mean, this is a genocide. I can't think of a time where this is anything even comparable has happened. The promotion, and it is promotion. I'm not inveighing here against homosexuals necessarily, but the promotion of sexual deviancy as a new normal, as anybody who's going to say I don't want this is now just a hater and an evil person. The industrial cruelty against animals, which has never been this kind of scale ever. There's a whole list of things. The economic tyranny, and it is a tyranny, and if you don't believe me, try not going to work tomorrow. Mm-hmm. The amount of hours that people used to work in the Dark Ages compared to what they work now, you'd think that they were on permanent holiday compared to what we go through. I mean, I have a background in Russian, so I know about something called abrok and barshina. I won't bore you with the technical details, but these were how Russian serfs were controlled. A Russian serf had to give up less of his income. A serf is just another word for slave, by the way. A Russian serf, a Russian slave, had to give up less of his income to the man who owned the land than we have to give up to the government today in various taxes, hidden and not hidden. We live in a position of servitude. We are under a system which fundamentally uses magic against us through television and various other things. The food is weaponized. The injections and the pharmaceuticals are weaponized. I mean, I could go on and on and on. And I'm assuming that some of your audience will know quite a lot of this.
Exactly. I was just going to say, now you're getting into the meat of what my audience knows. Yes.
Interestingly, all of this is pretty much in the Qur'an about changing the creation of God, about genetic engineering, all of this different stuff. And what's interesting is all these societies were destroyed before now. Now, for me, where I got to, when the backstory is we were living in Spain at that time, I sat down and I thought, what would I do if I could do anything? I mean, really. People say think out of the box. Everybody says think out of the box. I've never met anybody who talks about thinking out of the box who really does think out of the box. What they mean is thinking inside a new box.
Right.
But I thought, what would I do if really I could do anything? I thought if I could really do anything, I'd overthrow this evil elite. That's what I'd do. And how can you do that? Well, what you do is you look at what worked in the past. The Quran gives a very systematic methodology of how this is done. And it isn't about creating a huge group. It isn't about creating a big religion. It isn't about creating lots of people jumping up and down and getting the app and liking you on Facebook. No, that's not going to change anything. Actually, the methodology is something different to that, and that's what I go through in the God Protocol. It's quite a simple methodology, but it is a protocol. It follows certain rules. It's like a recipe. If you take toast and butter and marmalade, you're going to have marmalade on toast. That's just what you get if you put those three things together. Well, if you take these certain ingredients which the Quran talks about and apply them, well, then you get an iteration of what's called the God Protocol. And that's what each of these messengers did, and that's what this work, the God Protocol, which has been the driving force. It's why I did the Quran a complete revelation, because I had to do all of that back work first to clear all of this other stuff out of the way, so then I could do this. So is that clear? I mean, do I need to give you some more? Is that enough?
No, that's very clear. And just for the listeners again that probably are unfamiliar with the Quran, even from my own understanding of the book, it is a reminder, and the Quran has a lot of stories, if you will, retelling of what many of the other prophets went through. And if I'm not mistaken, they were all trying to warn a certain community of people who had gone sort of down this sort of dark or evil path. And with that warning, they were given a period of time to kind of fix their mess. And if not, they were wiped out.
Yes. Well, it's not it's a subset of the prophets. It's not that they all applied this protocol, but there is a subset of them, of which Muhammad was the last of whom we know.
Right.
And so, I mean, this is not, I mean, going back to, the fact that I'm a bit of a hidden gem, I make long, boring videos. I make no bones about it. I make videos which are quite long, which use more than 5 words. They haven't got any pictures of Kim Kardashian or anything like that. They're me talking about this stuff, right? Because what I'm doing is I'm putting the YouTube videos out there because I'm looking for people who can and will read my work and understand it. And if I make the gap between those two things too large, they're not going to get over that hurdle. And so also, I mean, look at it, what I'm actually saying here. I mean, if I'd been alive 50 years ago, I wouldn't be doing this. I wouldn't be doing the God Protocol, even if I understood it, even if I'd read the Quran and understood, I can see that that's how it works. That's the mechanism. Because we weren't, even though we had wars, the Second World War and so on, it's not evil like today. The problem with the evil today is they're creating a tyranny so perfect there's going to be no escape from it.
Right.
That's what they want. This isn't just even Stalinism. It's going to be much, much worse than that, and it's already beginning. They're creating a new tyranny, and it's beginning now with the tyranny of feelings, destroying men, destroying families, but destroying men in particular. Men are the enemy. They hate men because men will defend.
Yes.
And men naturally are actually quite often very spiritual. I don't mean in that kind of gushy-feely sort of way, but a deep down, when a man he's forced onto his own recognizance, when he really has to rely upon his own resources, he then seeks God in that particular place. But what's happened to him, he's been totally usurped. The woman is married to the state. The man is just basically like a live-in boyfriend that she can dump at any time she wants. The whole system is being destroyed, and there's no way out of this. And this is just one little thing. I'm not even getting into the food and the pharmaceuticals and what laughingly is called education, but it's really indoctrination into perversion, all these other things. When this is an unsolvable state. Now what I see is people out there saying they're fighting the New World Order and all this stuff. This is complete nonsense. They're not fighting anything. And the reason why I say that, and I don't say that in order to sort of set myself up above anybody, I'm not saying that, but unless a man has got rid of his vices, unless he has actually repented to God alone, unless he is living a pure life, any man who's out philandering and running after women and all this stuff, and I've done it. Okay, I'm not pretending. I've done it. I'm not pretending to be better than anyone else, but you can turn it around. God is receptive. God receives repentance. Repent, stop doing it, get clean. Then you can start to fight the New World Order, because it starts with you. It's not an outward battle. It starts with you. And the way the Qur'an works is it's a few good men. It's a few good men. So you, in a way, I'm not really interested in 1,000, whatever it is. Give me. I mean, all right. So let's say there's four, core guys who are really, really working now. That's my metric. It's not, however many YouTube subscribers I've got or whatever. Because for me, that's just a work overhead. It's just more, I have to get rid of, hates, comments and blah 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 blah. The fact that somebody subscribes, okay, fine. If they read my book, okay, fine. But I'm only interested in one thing. What are you going to do? Right. I don't care about your plans. I don't care about how much you like me. I don't care about blah, blah, blah. What are you going to do? D-O, do.
Yes.
People are completely thrown by this word. They don't know. Now, there are people who for whatever reason, they can't, and they support financially. And that's great. That is doing something. But you know what? The people who really support financially, you can very rarely find them to thank them. They're not even, they know what their role is. They do that and they're okay with it. And I'm okay with it. If you want to do that, that's fine. It definitely helps. And you are a partner in what we're doing. Yeah. But what I get is mainly people who want to talk. They want to, they want a therapy session. They want so for me, what my work is a lot to do with is just explaining this thing. And then challenging people to say, what are you going to do? What do you want to come to God with on the day of judgment? If you think this is right, then what are you going to do? And it isn't going to be about making me feel good about what a clever guy I am or anything like that. Do. I tell you, the stuff I get, Chris, the stuff in my inbox, if you want to get rid of people, just say, just give them something to do.
Right. Then they
that's
disappear.
It disappears. You never see them again. And that's what I do now. I just, if I reply, I just give them something to do, and that's the end of them, because people don't want to do anything. They want it to be easy. And this is another part of the war that's on us. We've all been trained to think that anything which is a little bit difficult isn't worth doing. But it isn't true. Stuff is tough. Mm-hmm. Life is hard. Choose whom you're going to serve. If God be God, then serve him. And if Baal be God, then serve him. But as for me and my family, we will serve the Lord. Those are the words, I think, it's of Joshua. And that's the way that I see it. For me, I see this as an investment. I want to get to God in the best possible condition. I just as background, I used to work around. These weren't my personal friends, but I have spent time, close with multi-billionaires, and it's not that impressive. I mean, if you have a choice of a Gulfstream private jet or not having one, well, take the jet.
Right.
But just having the jet isn't enough. It's not enough for me, because you're going to die. You can't take it with you, and all this life is over in an instance. If you think back just 10, 15 years, how quickly it goes. It just goes.
Yes.
But the eternal rewards, they are forever. And that's what I encourage people to take. And what's great about this is it doesn't matter how rich or poor you are. You can get some. You can go and grab you some, because guess what? Where I am, the workers are few. So, but that's my metric. And if you read this is actually the Quranic methodology. If you read carefully, for example, it has the story of Saul crossing over the river, and then he's getting rid of people. Anyone who drinks this water, except using his hand to drink, he's not of me. He gets rid of people, so that all he's got is this real hardcore of people who really know why they're there and don't want to leave. Even if you offered them a way out, they'd fight to stay. They're the people you want. Everyone else, dump them.
Right.
Because they'll only be a liability.
Well, now, what would you say then? You said that not all the prophets followed this sort of methodology of what you call a God protocol, but the direct method, it's more than just a warning.
Well, it comes in three stages. I mean, obviously, all of the prophets they had different things. For example, Ayub or Job. He was a prophet, but he wasn't of that particular type. Ishmael, he was a prophet, but not of that particular type. Idris, certainly if they were, those stories are not included in the Quran. As concerns the God protocol, as again, going back to my pantextual analysis, going through every single case, saying, what have these all got in common? They've all got these three aspects in common, these three components in common. There are three aspects to this. The first aspect is there has to be a message. Given by God, okay? And we still have that in the Quran. It is a message given by God, and it says it is a message from the Lord of all the worlds. So the message we still have. There has to be a messenger. Well, this word is a bit of a trigger word to Muslims.
To the brand Muslims, yes.
To the brand Muslims, yes. Many messengers were this, but the actual word is emissary. One sent, somebody who is sent. And we discover I discovered when I did my work on Musa vis-a-vis Fir'aun, which is getting quite technical here, but I think it's about chapter 9 if you want to look it up on my YouTube channel, that it's possible for so one sent, in that case was Musa, but there's the third component, which is this, what I call the detonation phrase, "O my people," which is when somebody who belongs to that particular community can turn around and warn. Now, normally it was one person fulfilled all three roles. But in the case of Musa vis-a-vis Fir'aun, what I discovered, and I didn't know this when I started writing, I mean, I'm a researcher. It's not like I start off with this fully formed idea and I know all the answers. No, this is my process of due diligence. I didn't know this, but I actually just took the time to work this out. That in this case, the detonating phrase, "Oh my people," was delivered by other people. So other people can be an emissary, other people can, as long as you've got the three components, the message, somebody sent, and this detonating phrase, then what happens is that after this has been said, and it's said to the ruling elite, again, this might be a bit of a new thought to many people, but most people don't matter. I'm sorry if that sounds insulting, but they actually don't. The only people who really matter, I mean, they matter individually. They matter as human beings. I'm not saying they don't, but in terms of control, the only people who matter today are the ruling elite. Everybody, pretty much, nobody else matters. And this whole idea of, when enough people wake up and all this is illusory. It's an idiotic thing to say, and it just frankly irritates me. So, and the Quran doesn't go to the masses, it goes to the elite.
Yes.
Always, because the elite, they're the people, who have the power. And so what happens is, I didn't write this book, so if you take it out of the Quran if you don't like what I'm saying, but the way it works is that the messengers would then warn the ruling elite, who typically would reject, and then after this point of warning, the Quranic phraseology is the punishments of God become binding. It means that if they don't, after this "Oh my people" phrase has been used, if they don't repent after that point, then the punishments of God are binding. It's a protocol, a bit like the Miranda law, where after the arresting officer says to you, you have the right to remain silent, anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law, etc., etc. Thereafter, after that point, after that specific moment in time, anything you say, anything that happens has got a completely different legal status.
Yes.
Well, that's what the Qur'an is doing, and that's what the God protocol is in summary.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I've been really interested in that work you've been doing because, for example, one of the things that it wasn't something that I was aware of through my own studies of Qur'an, was how you mentioned that all the warnings are to the elite.
Yeah.
They're not, the prophets aren't going to like normal regular dudes on the street, man.
No, they're not. No, they're not. I mean, obviously, you can talk to people, and my work is generally directed to the people who would spend time on on my YouTube channel and read my book and so on. But ultimately, in terms of this, mechanism, it's directed to the elite. And just something I'd say to your audience. I mean, your audience are engaged people. They're people who are obviously capable of their own process of thought and all the rest of it. But have they ever considered? I'd ask them to consider this. It's almost like a heresy now if you say you don't believe in the "when enough people wake up" idea. And I hear it over and over again. It's that all these people going through their big analysis of who's at the top of this and who's to blame, and it doesn't matter one way or another. Their solution is always the same: when enough people wake up. Firstly, when have you ever known anybody, in any numbers, wake up, in inverted commas? When has that ever happened in history? I mean, ever. Okay, that'd be my first question. Secondly, this is something which people just accept axiomatically, like the idea that the Earth's a ball or whatever, all this other nonsense we're told when we're in school. We're also trained in this idea that the more people who believe something, the truer it is. The more people who believe something, the more likely it is to be right or to to sort of be effective. Just ask yourself: the ruling elite, okay, they comprise 0.000000001% of the world population.
Yes.
If anybody knows that what most people think doesn't matter a damn, it's these people, because their every single waking moment confirms this to them. Why would they give us this? And nobody questions it. And if you say this to people who are supposedly truthers and supposedly fighting the New World Order, and say you don't believe in this, you've destroyed their holy cow. They can't handle it. And really, because they haven't got a reason, they haven't got an answer to that question. But the Quran has an answer to it, and the answer is this: it's the God protocol. This is what's going to take these people down, but it's not going to take them down in a way that everyone else is going to. If it works, I mean, if the Quran is true. And if I'm correct, and this protocol is what it is, then I would advise people to think quite carefully about where their priorities lie, because the Quranic history behind this is that the entire community is destroyed. Now, am I in favor of this? No, I'm not in favor of this. Do I wish there was some other way of changing this? Definitely. I hate this. I don't like it. But what I see is, Chris, the problem is that if things stay the way they are, there's going to be a creation of such a tyranny that is going to be perfected.
Yes.
And there's no way out of that. And for me, unfortunately, I'm between a rock and a hard place. The choice is between total annihilation at the hand of God or endless tyranny at the hand of Satanists. Mm-hmm. That's the choice.
Yeah, I see that coming. I think it makes it difficult for people that realize it. It makes it difficult for them to make the choice to have children.
Of course.
And it's very sad.
Yeah, it is. However, I would say on that, if you read in the Quran about Musa, about Moses, if you read the Quranic version of it, he left Madian with his family and their flocks. And went out, and then he was called and sent to Firaun with his family. There's never a good time to have children.
Yeah, true.
So that's the way, that would be my answer to that. It is a difficult one. I do accept that. And I don't like being the bearer of bad news, but it is what, you have to start with an objective analysis. And this is the objective analysis, that we are utterly screwed.
Yeah.
Absent an outside intervention. And this is the only way to do it that I know of.
No, that's fantastic. And again, guys, if you're curious about what Sam is talking about now, his YouTube channel is below. He's done a series of videos on this God protocol, so you can go and check it out yourself. He does have his website, which is linked below, and there is a free version of his Qur'an, a complete revelation, which you can download. I often hear people say, oh, I've never read the Qur'an, I'm not interested, and like, well, if you want to understand kind of these questions you keep having about Islam, just read it.
Yeah,
it's pretty easy.
If anybody wants to find me, just look up Sam Gerrans. That's Gerrans in a search engine, and you'll find my website, which is Qur'anite.com.
Was I saying your name wrong the whole time?
Yeah, it's a hard G. I have a hard G, man.
I'm sorry, man.
That's no problem. It's but the site is Qur'anite.com, which is Qur'anite.com, and you can download everything there for free. So, and I would just say, if you're not a big reader and you think it's going to be a tough thing, just if people get it, and just read the preface. It's one page, just one side. And if you don't want to continue after that, well, that's your choice. But I think it will give you, that one page will give you a fair introduction to what the rest of it's going to do for you.
Perfect. Sorry about that, man. I was saying Sam Gerrans the whole time. It's Gerrans, people. I was mispronouncing it. But okay, so we're at just about an hour and a half. So let me just see if there's a few questions that I can say to you from some of the people that were watching. I don't know if any of it would be really specific to your work.
Sure.
Probably generally Muslim related stuff. I do find that again, like I said, most of my viewers are just MGTOW men. They're not really that big into religion or understanding it. So
far away.
Okay, I've had two about the word fatwa.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe if we can, one Sleeping Elephant asks if you can. I'll kind of go from bottom and then scroll back up, but. I know that Lamprey mentioned fatwa, and Sleeping Elephant says, please explain fatwa.
Well, I think this is a question really you need to get somebody on who is apologist for brand Islam. I'm not here to really discuss it because I've got no more connection with it than they have.
Yes.
It's you use Google and you'll get your answer. That isn't really what I'm not here as defending it.
Mm-hmm.
Fatwas, in short, are pretty much the same thing as a papal bull, which under the Catholic Church it would be a sort of a decree coming down from the organized religion as to its understanding or its judgment on a certain thing. But see Wikipedia for details.
Yeah, exactly. You're talking about language that is favored by the brand Muslims that follow that religion, and it's not something that really has a lot of meaning in regards to what we're talking about when it comes to Islam as Islam as defined in the Qur'an. So let me see, there was another one. Okay, M says this, do you think Islam could benefit from a reformation?
That's a better question. Islam is going to be reformed whether it likes it or not. I'm not interested in doing any of that. What's going to happen to it as it's being imported into the West, and it's being imported into the West with left cover, and the reason is that because liberals hate Europeans and they also hate reality, but I think they hate Europeans possibly a little bit more. So that's the cover. But the reason that it's being imported in is several reasons, which perhaps I'll leave for another time. But what's going to happen to it? What's going to happen to it is in order for it to continue to operate in a democracy, so-called, which is becoming ever more tyrannical, is that it's going to have to learn to be more hypocritical. And I think that that's already beginning. I think that quite a lot of the apologists for that religion are trying to tone some of it down. They have quite a lot of problems with it of a technical nature, really to do with the nature of what hadith are and how they have something's called an isnad, which is basically a pedigree of who said what to whom over a chain of so-called transmission, and it's very difficult to mess around with that whole system without the whole house of cards coming down. But in short, yes, I think that what they're already trying it. What they're trying to do is to have like a feminized, feminazized form of it, a kind of gay-friendly version of it, this, a vegetarian form of it. And what they'll try to do is just sort of is to fracture it along as many lines as possible until it's just sort of woven into the big paste of nothingness, which is what they're creating. The New World Order, in my opinion, is creating. So I don't think it's going to go through anything as clear as the Reformation. I think what's going to happen is it's just basically going to become diffused. It's going to become sort of mixed in as everybody basically just sinks into their iPhones for the rest of eternity. Suddenly, Islam is going to be a very wide mix. That's what it's going to have. I think you're going to see more, active lesbian Muslims and all of this, and then you'll get
burqas and bikinis.
Yeah, that's right. And so it's just going to become a joke, and I think that's the closest to a reformation it's ever going to come to. But just to say for the record, I'm not interested in it. I'm not interested in Islamic religion. I'm interested in those who serve God, truly, and have repented to God truly, and believe in God on the last day and do good works. And if they do that and call themselves, whatever they call themselves, that's, I'm all right with that. I'm talking about, the one God. I'm not talking about some sort of paganist thing. But what happens to Brand Islam isn't really my concern, frankly. And I don't think the people bringing it into the West care about it either. It was the golden boy for quite a long time. It could do no wrong, and if anybody criticized it, they got shot down. But I think what's happening now is that the elite have said, no, you can criticize it now because it's done its job. It was just basically the Trojan horse being brought in, and it's done its job. Europe's finished, America's finished. They don't need to continue defending Islam because it was never really about this so-called religion. It's about other things.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. I actually wanted I put that in my notes that I wanted to mention to you how it's incredible how much even just the difference 20 years make. Whereas or was it 20 years ago it was 9/11, and as soon as that moment happened, if you were a Muslim living in the West, it was a pretty rough deal because you were kind of lumped in as part of this whole terrorist religion. But
sure.
But now 20 years later, you're not allowed to say bad things about them, man. It's just mind blowing.
We're living through a business plan, and if you can see that, then you're not probably a good person to take to dinner parties.
Absolutely. Yeah, man. It's been a very fascinating exchange of how the elite and the rest of the world. And I think you're right. I think Islam is going to. It is the only reformation it's going to get as a religion, as Brand Islam, is basically the people in charge are going to say, okay, now you're going to have to adapt your religion to ours, and of course the elite, they worship the material world. So
I think Islam worships the same thing fundamentally. They've imported it for whatever reasons. What happens next isn't my concern. What my concern is really to do with what the Qur'an says. And if that becomes a primary concern of Brand Islam, then there'll be something to talk about. But in the meantime, I'm just going to get on with my work.
Yes. Yeah, and we're just over an hour and a half. I think we're good. We didn't really get a lot of questions in the comments. Didn't have too many viewers, but everybody was civil and listened. So thank you guys for that. Sam, it was really great having you on, and just at least introducing your ideas to a new audience that might go and look and see what you're doing and check out your work.
I appreciate the invitation, Chris. Thanks a lot.
All right, guys, we're gonna end the stream there. Thank you for tuning in. Again, check out the links; they're there for Sam's website and his YouTube channel. And we will talk to you again in a couple days. I will be on again, and hope maybe one day we can get you on again too.